was a warm, late summer afternoon when my wife and I signed the papers, and I was 27 years old. We had just gotten married 2 months earlier and were still living out of boxes in my brother's spare room, counting every dollar and pretending we weren't stressed about money. The house we bought was an old fixer-upper on the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place people drove past without ever really seeing. The floors creaked when you walked on them, the paint peeled in thin curls from the window frames, and the basement smelled faintly of damp earth. But it was ours, and for the price we paid, we convinced ourselves we could turn it into something good. We spent the first few weeks cleaning, sanding, painting, and arguing about where to put the couch. It felt like the beginning of a real life. For the first month, nothing seemed out of the ordinary beyond the usual quirks of an old house. The pipes knocked in the walls at random hours, and sometimes the floorboards popped under our feet like they were settling into a new shape. Our dog Milo didn't seem to mind the move at first. He explored every room, sniffed every corner, and curled up at the foot of our bed each night like he always had. It was easy to laugh off the noises and chalk them up to age. Everyone says old houses make sounds. Everyone says you get used to it, then the knocking started. At first, it was faint. A dull thump from beneath the bedroom floor late at night, like someone gently tapping a knuckle against wood. I would freeze in bed and listen, holding my breath until it stopped. My wife told me it was probably just the pipes expanding or the house settling. I wanted to believe her. Over the next few weeks, it happened more often. Sometimes it came in slow, uneven taps. Other times, it sounded like something shifting under the floor, followed by a soft scrape. Milo began to growl at one corner of the room, low and deep in his chest, his hackles rising as he backed away. No matter how much we coaxed him, he refused to go near that spot. One night, my wife dropped her phone as she was getting into bed. It bounced once on the floor and slid straight into a loose floor vent near the wall. She laughed at first, then sighed in frustration and told me I'd have to get it. I pried the vent loose with a screwdriver, expecting nothing more than dust and maybe a spider web. Instead, a wave of warm air drifted up, carrying the faint, sour smell of sweat. I hesitated, then shined my flashlight down into the opening. The beam caught on something wet and reflective. For a split second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I realized they were eyes, a pair of eyes wide and unblinking, staring back at me from the darkness. I jerked back so hard I slammed my head against the bed frame. My wife screamed. Milo went wild, barking and snarling at the vent. The eyes vanished instantly, swallowed by the black beneath the floor. We called the police with shaking hands and waited in the living room with every light in the house turned on. When the officers arrived, they tore up sections of the floor and followed a narrow crawl space that ran beneath several rooms of the house. Inside, they found blankets, canned food, used plates, and a notebook filled with messy handwriting. Page after page listed our routines: when we woke up, when we showered, when we left for work. When we turned off the lights at night, the intruder was gone by the time they finished searching. They said there was an exterior drain tunnel that led out from the crawl space, and whoever had been down there must have slipped away when we called for help. They told us it was rare but not unheard of. People find ways into places they don't belong. They told us to change the locks, to install cameras, to be vigilant. Their words didn't make me feel better. All I could think about was how long someone had been lying under our bedroom, listening to us breathe in the dark. We moved out less than a week later, sold the house at a loss to anyone willing to take it. Even now, years later, I can't sleep in any room with wooden floors without imagining the hollow space beneath me. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I still swear I hear knocking. Next story. 5 years ago, my partner and I moved into our first real home. It wasn't anything special. A quiet street, trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. We were just grateful to finally have a place that was ours. The kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. The house across the street was occupied by a couple who never spoke to anyone. Not to us, not to the other neighbors, not even to the kids who rode their bikes up and down the pavement. They never waved. They never smiled. They never had visitors. Every morning at exactly 7:30, both of them would leave the house. Every evening at exactly 6:10, both of them would return. It became so predictable that we joked about setting our watches to them. At first, we thought they were just private people. Some folks don't like small talk. Some people prefer silence, but over time, it started to feel less like privacy and more like something deliberate. Like they were trying not to be noticed. The first strange thing we noticed was the vans. Late at night, usually after midnight, a dark van would pull up outside their house. It would stay for a few minutes, sometimes 10, sometimes 15, and then drive away. No headlights when it arrived. No doors we could see opening, just the low hum of an engine and then silence again. Then the street cameras started acting weird. There were 2 cameras mounted on poles at either end of our block. One morning, my partner pointed out that the camera facing our neighbor's house had been turned slightly, just enough so their front door was no longer in view. A few days later, the other camera was angled away too. We reported it to the city. They said they'd send someone out. The cameras stayed that way. After that, the noises started, heavy crashes in the middle of the night. Not like furniture being moved, more like something being dropped hard, followed by muffled thuds. Once we heard what sounded like shouting, but it cut off too suddenly to make sense of it. Every time we looked outside, their house was dark, no lights, no movement. One afternoon, a delivery driver pulled up in front of their house. We saw him walk up to the door with a small package. He knocked. The door opened. He stepped inside. We waited for him to come back out. He never did. His van sat there for almost an hour before someone else came and drove it away. We told ourselves there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd gone inside for a drink of water. Maybe someone else was inside the van. It sounded stupid, even in our own heads. The night everything broke, we were sitting in the living room with the lights off, watching TV. Around 1 a.m., we heard a car stop outside, then voices. Low, urgent. When we peeked through the curtains, we saw 2 figures dragging a third man up the front steps of the house across the street. His feet were scraping against the concrete. He tried to pull away. One of them hit him hard and they dragged him inside. The door shut. We didn't hesitate. We called the police. Our hands were shaking as we tried to explain what we'd seen. The dispatcher told us officers were on the way. When the police arrived, the neighbor's house looked completely normal, lights on, curtains drawn neatly. The couple answered the door calmly. The officers went inside. They came back out less than 10 minutes later. No signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no one else inside. The officers gave us that look. The one that says they think you imagined it. A week later, a package showed up on our porch. It wasn't addressed to us. The name was unfamiliar. We knocked on our neighbor's door to return it. No answer. We waited until morning and called the delivery company. They told us to open it and look for a return address. Inside were blood-stained clothes and a small black phone. No charger, no contacts, just a blank screen. My stomach dropped. We called the police again. This time they took it seriously. The next morning, the house across the street was empty, curtains gone, garage open, no furniture, no car, no sign anyone had ever lived there. The property was still in their name. They hadn't sold it. They hadn't told anyone they were leaving. They had just vanished. Weeks later, detectives told us what they believed had been happening. The house had been used as a temporary torture and interrogation site by a criminal gang. People were brought in, questioned, hurt, and then moved somewhere else. Sometimes they didn't leave at all. We still live in the same house. The street looks the same. The hedges are trimmed. The mailboxes are identical, but every time I look at the empty house across the street, I think about how close we were to people who made others disappear. And how easily evil can hide in plain sight, as long as it stays quiet enough. Next story. This all started back in late 2022, when I was in my junior year of high school, living in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small town with my parents and older brother. Before I get into the worst part of this, I need to explain a few things about my room and what the backyard looked like, because none of what happened makes sense without that context. Our house sits at the very end of a cul-de-sac, and the backyard backs up to an open field that used to be farmland. Separating our yard from that field is a thin line of trees, mostly tall pines and scraggly brush that don't really block much of the view, especially in the winter when the leaves are gone. My bedroom is on the second floor and my window faces directly toward that tree line. At night, if the lights in my room are on, the glass reflects back at me, so I usually keep my curtains halfway open to let in some air and a bit of moonlight. I've always liked sleeping with my window cracked open. I can't stand feeling trapped in stale air, and our house gets stuffy at night even in colder months. Most nights I'd sit on my bed scrolling through TikTok or watching random YouTube videos until I got tired enough to fall asleep. From where I sat, I could see the dark stretch of our backyard and the shadowy shapes of the trees beyond it. At first, it was just background scenery, something I barely paid attention to. But over time, I started noticing a darker shape near the tree line on certain nights. It wasn't always there, and when it was, it didn't move much. I assumed it was a stray dog or maybe a deer standing still, or even just shadows lining up in a weird way. I never thought much of it. Then I started hearing footsteps. It wasn't loud or sudden. It sounded like slow, careful steps on dry leaves, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else is quiet. The first time I heard it, I froze and held my breath, waiting to see if it would continue. The moment I shifted in my bed, the sound stopped. That made me feel stupid for being scared, like I just imagined it. I went back to my phone and told myself it was probably just a raccoon or something moving around in the yard. Over the next few weeks, it happened a few more times, always the same pattern. I'd hear the soft crunch of leaves, and when I moved, rolled over, or even adjusted my blanket, the sound would stop completely. I tried not to think about it. I didn't want to turn something small into a big deal in my head. One night, I noticed the dark shape again near the trees. This time, it felt closer than before, but I couldn't tell for sure because the yard is poorly lit. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for it to move. It didn't. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself it was nothing. I closed my curtains a little more and turned my phone brightness down, hoping that would help me relax. I eventually fell asleep, but I had weird dreams that night, the kind where you feel like you're being watched even when you're alone. A few nights later, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they sounded closer to the house. I sat up slowly and listened. The sound was so faint that I wondered if I was just hyper-aware of every little noise now. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, telling myself I'd feel better if I just checked and proved there was nothing there. I pushed the curtain aside and shined the light toward the tree line. For a second, all I saw were trunks and branches. Then the beam caught the outline of something standing perfectly still at the edge of the trees. It wasn't an animal, it was too tall and too straight. I realized I was looking at the silhouette of a man facing my window. My stomach dropped. I couldn't move. I don't even remember breathing. The light from my phone shook in my hand, and the figure didn't react at all. He didn't wave, didn't turn away, didn't step back into the trees. He just stood there as if he had been frozen in place. That's when the reality of it hit me, and I screamed for my parents. The second my voice broke the silence, the silhouette turned and disappeared into the darkness between the trees. By the time my dad ran into my room and looked out the window, there was nothing there. My parents called the police, and officers came out to search the field and the wooded area behind our house. They walked along the tree line with flashlights, checking the ground and the surrounding yards, but they didn't find anyone. One of them suggested it could have been a trespasser passing through, or even my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. I didn't like that answer, but I nodded anyway because I didn't know what else to say. My parents tried to reassure me that we were safe, and for a while I wanted to believe that whatever I'd seen was a one-time thing. A few days later, after it rained, my mom noticed footprints in the muddy patch of ground directly below my window. There were also crushed cigarette butts and a couple of empty food wrappers tucked into the bushes near the fence. Seeing that made something cold settle in my chest. It meant someone hadn't just wandered through once. Someone had been standing there long enough to smoke, eat, and watch my window. Night after night, while I sat on my bed thinking I was alone, someone had been out there in the dark, just beyond the edge of the yard. After that, my parents didn't waste any time. They installed floodlights along the back of the house and set up security cameras facing the yard and the tree line. I switched rooms with my brother so I wouldn't have a window facing the field anymore. Even with all of that, I still couldn't relax at night. Every shadow outside looked wrong. Every small noise made my heart race. I started sleeping with my curtains tightly closed and a lamp on, even though I hated it. What scares me the most isn't just that someone was out there watching me. It's how long it could have been happening before I noticed, and how easily I convinced myself that nothing was wrong. I used to think my room was the one place I was completely safe. Now I can't fall asleep with any window uncovered, and I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a dark tree line the same way again.